Amak merat ike tesol derat ikmerut.
The previous 4 videos in this series focused on various kinds of argument structures, validity, and soundness, with some brief discussion on formal fallacies, propositions, and inferences. The next few videos will focus on the laws of logic as found in classical logic. The first one we will focus on is the Law of Non-Contradiction, which you will sometimes see shortened to LNC. This is a simple but important law when it comes to understanding logic, especially as we often see skeptics and atheists arguing that contradictions in an argument are evidence that an argument is false. So what is the law of non-contradiction? The law of non-contradiction is usually formulated along the lines of something cannot both be true and not true in the same sense and same way at the same time. It can be found being discussed in Aristotle's metaphysics and being formulated in a few different ways. It can be formulated ontologically, epistemically, and semantically. That is to say, it can be related to something's existence and being, what we know and believe, and how we use language. In the ontological or existence and being sense, it is said that it is impossible for that same thing to belong and not belong at the same time to the same thing and in the same respect. This refers to, say, specific characters that something has. For example, the LNC would be used to argue something like, it is not possible for something to be both visible and not visible at the same time. Or, it is not possible for someone to both believe and not believe that God exists. Or, it is not possible for a car to both be red and not be red at the same time. The first example refers to the object's visibility, so the true and not true are referring to the same thing or characteristic. One could argue here that it could be visible to one person from one angle and not visible to another person from another angle, and I have had people argue this with me. A simple response to this is that this is a misunderstanding of what the law is arguing. The objection ignores the in the same sense part of the principle on display. If it is visible to one person from one angle and not visible to another person from another angle, then we are clearly not talking about it being visible and not visible in the same sense. The principle is arguing that it would not be possible for it to be visible and not visible to the same person from the same angle, not to two different people looking from different angles and in different positions. We can also see how language can play a part in this principle with this example also. If we reframe the statement as, it is not possible for an object to be both visible and invisible, this is saying essentially the same thing, only with different language. If something is invisible, then it is not visible, meaning that a statement like this violates the LNC as well, even if it is using language that doesn't exactly resemble that of the LNC. The third example mentioned, it is not possible for a car to be red and not red at the same time, is a similar example to the visible and not visible. It should be obvious why this one breaks the LNC. A car clearly cannot both have red properties and not have red properties at the same time. Though I have commonly come across the objection that the statement is false because a car can be both red and blue, so can be red and not red at the same time. The error in this objection is obvious too when thinking about the counterexample of something being visible to one person and not visible to another. This objection is speaking of the cars having the two colors in a different way and in a different sense. To some extent, language is to blame with this objection, as the statement can sound as if it's saying that it can only be red. However, what the not red refers to here is a negation of the claim that the car contains red. It is saying something like red both exists and does not exist on this car, or the car has red and a complete lack of red. It is also possible to combine the first and third example to show a way that language can hide an example of breaking the LNC that might not be obvious to some. Consider a statement like, this object is both pink and invisible. It would be a contradiction to claim this, as for something to be pink, it must be visible. Colors can only be seen on objects that are visible, as they are the result of reflected light, meaning that a statement like, this object is both pink and invisible, is actually a form of the statement, this object is both visible and invisible, or this this object is both visible and not visible. So we can see how language can sometimes obfuscate what is a breaking of the LNC and an illogical claim. The second example, it is not possible to both believe God exists and not believe God exists at the same time, is a slightly more obvious example too. This one is entirely intuitive and holds for a statement like it is not possible to both believe God exists and believe God does not exist at the same time too, as to believe God does not exist includes not believing God exists. These statements clearly contradict each other and are thus not possible states of affairs, which is what the purpose of the LNC is, to argue that certain states of affairs are not possible. Any argument that contains a contradiction and uses that contradiction to argue for a conclusion must be false, as the state of affairs is false according to the LNC, and therefore any conclusion relying on that state of affairs existing or being true must also therefore be false. So, to sum up, the law of non-contradiction is a principle of logic that states that something cannot both be true and not be true in the same sense and same way at the same time. Any statement that contradicts itself is necessarily not true according to the LNC, and any conclusions that rely on that statement being true are therefore false.